Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Counting on Chazin. I'm Julia Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy, and today we have Chris Bavolack back with us, Director of Finance and Operations of Chazin Company. Chris, you're going to pull back the curtain on financial transparency and why it's so critical. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. And I love this subject. I think it's really important for nonprofits in general. And I think back to a time when I was working with an executive leadership program, and one of the things that I came away with that I always remember is that if an individual operates or behaves in a genuine and authentic manner, then they're going to earn the credibility, the respect, and the trust of their colleagues. And when you think about it, operating in a genuine and authentic manner is really operating in a transparent manner. You get what you see is what you get. There's no hidden agendas. And I think the same applies to a nonprofit. A nonprofit should operate in a genuine and authentic and transparent manner to earn the trust, the credibility, the respect of its stakeholders.
I love that because I think that you do hear a lot about being an authentic leader and being transparent, but we don't always know what that means and we don't always know why that's important. So I really appreciate you kind of giving us a lens and helping us maybe recalibrate our mindset. And with that, I want to ask you my first question. And when you and I talk, I always end up peppering you with questions, so I kind of apologize for this. But you always
I'm used to it now. So
cool. That's a good thing. But you always make me think. And one of those questions I have is when we talk about this issue of financial transparency and institutional transparency for our nonprofits, is this radically different from the for-profit sector? I mean, is that why this sometimes is a struggle?
not, no, I mean, it shouldn't be. If you think about a private corporation, obviously a private company keeps all its information closely held. The owner knows what's going on. They have all the information. But if you jump to a corporation that's on the stock market, for instance, a publicly held company, the SEC requires certain information that has to be provided to stockholders because the stockholders are the owners. Well, nonprofits a little different. There aren't owners like that, but the people that support the organization are external to the organization. So they need to know what the organization is doing with their support, with their funds. So the fact that, for instance, that the 990 is required to be distributed to anyone who asks for it is not surprising because it's essentially being distributed to the people who are supporting that organization.
I love how you framed that up because I think it makes it, for me, it's not only a reason to be transparent, but it really is articulating the benefits of being transparent. And I want to kind of move into the next level of this, and that is when you talk about stakeholder transparency, um, that seems to me like it's even opening the door to more people. It's not just the quote unquote donor, but it's, governments, contractors. We could go on and on and on. And I mean, is that correct?
Right. I mean, anyone who could be involved with an organization, and I think we've talked about this a little bit in another webinar, the stakeholders range from the donors, the board members, the volunteers, the partners, the people who are served by the organization. They're all stakeholders of the organization and probably all need to, deserve to know what's going on with the organization, how the organization is being run and how effective it is.
Yeah, I like that. And I think it also, um, I think it builds conversation, which is always, I think, a good thing. And one of those conversations that we're seeing more and more of are the watchdog groups. So if you could talk a little bit about that, and how the watchdog groups then take our information and sometimes act as that buffer, right?
Yeah, and that really leads to a couple different reasons for having financial transparency. And I mentioned it already with the stakeholders, and that's just building confidence in the people that you work with on a day-to-day basis so that they want to work with you. Watchdog groups like Charity Navigator look at information, not of every single nonprofit in the country, but a lot of nonprofits. And they look at the 990 and they look for information, and they look at the website and look for information there to see how transparent an organization really is. And really the belief there is that if an organization is accountable and transparent, they're likely operating in a manner of high integrity, that there's a direct correlation there, and that other people believe that as well, that if an organization is willing to be open on the table with everything they do, then they're above board and they're a high integrity organization.
Okay, so then I got to ask this follow-up question.
Mm-hmm.
What if maybe some of this information isn't that great? I mean, as you have said to me in the past, let's be real, for 2 years, it's been a slog for a lot of our nonprofits,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe we don't have the best things to report. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think when you build a culture of transparency, you need to be consistent with it, and that means sharing the good and the bad. Now, no one's going to be surprised if over the last couple of years you've got a few blemishes on your financials. It's been a tough time for everyone.
Yeah.
But taking that a step further, it's not just sharing the numbers. It's also how does the organization react to that? How is it operating? How is it trying to get back on track? That's important information to share as well. So that could be something on a website that's addressing challenges. It could be board minutes that are shared to show that the board is addressing some of the recent challenges. So transparency really means sharing data, but also sharing how you operate around that data and with that data.
So I'm kind of fascinated by that because you're talking then about things that go into maybe programming, effectiveness, your budgets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Impact statements, the data and the metrics. I mean, I always think of when I hear the word transparency that it's an accounting issue, but you're really opening that door, as we said earlier, wider and saying, no, it's going to be reporting on a lot of different things, right?
Yeah, it's sharing a lot of information. And, if you go onto the internet and even just Google on nonprofit transparency, you'll find some websites that have checklists of different things that should be included, to be regarded as a transparent organization. I mean, some of the things are very, very basic and very simple. Start with your 501c3 nonprofit letter, your articles of incorporation, your bylaws. If you have 990s to post as well, your audited financial statements, if you're audited, those are all very easy things to get and to share on your website as a first step to being transparent. Beyond that, you can share policies like conflict of interest policies, whistleblower policies, privacy policies, again, to show that you have your ducks in a row and you're managing your organization effectively. Sharing who your board members are, your leadership, your key staff members is also important as well. And of course, keeping that information up to date as it changes. Those are all ways that you can start right away in becoming a more transparent organization.
Yeah, I love that because again, it's such a healthy reminder and maybe a mindset shift to recognize that transparency involves a lot of different things. It's not just a financial document or IRS filings. It can be a lot more.
Mhm.
Super interesting, and I appreciate you talking about that. Now, one of the things that you said to me that I thought earlier in another episode of Counting on Chazin is you brought this up, and I thought it was really, as they say, emotionally intelligent. You said, Julia, you know, isn't it interesting how much of this work and of the discussions that we have lead back to communications? And we don't always think of accounting and communications as being, on the same path. But I think you're here to tell us that, yeah, this is a communication strategy, or it should be.
It is. It's part of that communication strategy of, again, building that integrity, that confidence in your organization. And every organization has to develop its own rules around what transparency means for them and what they're going to share. But I believe that the more transparent you are and the more good information that you can share, again, even beyond that financial data that you're talking about, the better off you're going to be in the long run, because it just gives people more information of who you are and what you're doing.
Well, and as we've been talking today, so much of this impacts the financial data. So it does go back to the original story of what are we doing with our resources? How are we managing, and how are we being strong fiduciaries of
Mhm.
our stewardship dollars and resources that are coming in? So I mean, it's so interesting to me, Chris, how it all swirls around itself. And I think that it's really an interesting aspect that you bring up, the culture of transparency. And I
Mhm.
don't want to move too much further into the discussion um, until I have you maybe dig in a little bit more on the culture, because I would imagine for some boards, especially when they're coming from the private sector, the for-profit sector, this might seem a little daunting.
Yeah, I mean, there could be a little bit of trepidation in providing this information, either because something that's happened recently is not something they want everybody to know about.
Yeah.
Um, it could also, there could be a factor in just operationalizing this depending on the size of the organization. So I think, the first level in developing the culture really does need to be between the executive leadership of the organization and the board, and to talk about how they're going to define transparency, what transparency is going to mean for them, what are they comfortable with sharing. Again, I would like to see as much out there as possible, as you have. Um, but and then once everyone is comfortable with that and it's agreed with, then you determine how you're going to operationalize that, and how are you going to get started initially, get things up on your website, on a web page. What's the process going to be for updating information, including new information? But I mean, going back to the culture, it's it is. It's everybody in the room saying, we believe this is important, and we're going to, we're going to do this. We're going to commit to this, and everyone understanding why they're committing to it. And that's really the first step, because if you got a lot of heads shaking, no, 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 we're not doing that around the room, then it's probably not going to happen. Or maybe there'll be some compromise. Well, can we at least put this up, or whatever? I don't want to give the impression that it's going to be a slam dunk in all cases. But I hope, my hope is that when people really think about it and think about the importance of it, that they will go in this direction.
Another thing that you shared with me before, and that is, and this is a much bigger picture, and sometimes it's hard for us to see this when we're so enmeshed in our own little world and our own little ecosystem that we're dealing with. But when we, as a sector, make these commitments and we march forward on these ideas of being more transparent, it elevates our entire sector.
Yeah, absolutely. It is not just important for the organization, but
Yeah.
if the whole nonprofit sector were to adopt, transparency as part of their culture, then the general public at large would be more confident in the nonprofit sector, and want to engage with them and support nonprofits. So it really, if it could become the norm that when you go to a company website, you're going to find this information. I'm not a company website, a nonprofit website, you're going to find this information, and it's just standard operating procedure. I think that would go a long way to support the credibility of the nonprofit sector. Yeah.
You've got me thinking, because it almost seems like we need to throw out a national challenge to put up a transparency tab, you know, um, or portal on our nonprofit website, so that our donors and our funders and our investors, even potential board members or staff, would know they can go to a one tab, one place on a website, and start to see and expect that they're
Mhm.
going to get this information, because it's not about hiding it. It's about, assorting it and then
Mhm.
pulling it together and making it, visible and accessible. It's really an interesting concept. I was talking, earlier with you about this as well as being in the nonprofit sector. I'm on websites all day long, and I'm working with nonprofits across this great country of ours, and I am not seeing this on websites. Not to the degree that I should. Now, you could hunt and peck and you might see information or an impact report or something like that, but a one-stop location where this information is posted, I don't think it's being done. Do you?
No. It's not, probably not as much as we would hope, and I don't think it's necessarily because people don't want to share this information. It's just not being
Right.
thought of as
Right.
one of those boxes to check when you're running a nonprofit. And I think that's where we need to get to, is that everybody starts to believe that, okay, part of what we need to do is to be transparent. When you click on About Us, like you said, there's always a
Mhm.
transparency tab there, or a financial statements tab, or whatever it is, and people can easily find this information. So I really, again, it's cultural, it's process oriented. It just needs to be part of the way nonprofits are run on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, so then give me some guidance here. If maybe we're an organization that we're going to say, okay, we've listened to Chris and counting on Chazin, we've learned that this really should be a cultural position that we take. It could kind of seem overwhelming to start putting all this together and knowing that we're not going to do this all in 1 week, probably. Could you guide us to best practices of like where we even start?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the structure of the organization and the relationship between the board and the CEO or executive director, I mean, you decide, does the first conversation need to happen at a board meeting where a CEO comes and says, okay, I think transparency is important. I want to present this to the board. Here are the things that I think we should do. Let's have this discussion. If it's a nonprofit where the CEO has latitude to make those decisions on their own, then maybe they can just take the first steps. And the first steps can be as simple as posting your 990s, posting your audit reports, posting some of your policies, like I said, your determination letter, your bylaws, those types of information. That's a really good start. This is not a really intense and intellectual decision. It really is just sharing information. And then once you've got the basics, then you kind of think about, okay, what else might be helpful? What additional information might make sense? And like I said, some have gone as far to share board minutes or finance committee minutes or things like that, so people can see how the organization is run. And that's, I understand it's a more sensitive decision, and the way minutes are written will impact that and everything. And so I understand that that's a bigger decision, but it's pretty easy to get started once the organization embraces transparency.
So this makes me think, and again, you just kind of got my wheels spinning here. Would you consider a nonprofit strategic plan part of that transparency, or is that
Sure.
something else?
Yeah, I mean, I could see it being part of this transparency, but I could see it being part of a normal part of just a website. I think if you've embarking on a big strategic plan and you've got goals, I mean, just put aside transparency for a second. You probably want people to know about it. You want donors to know about that, because that may even be more of just a communications and fundraising or membership type of initiative, not even transparency, but yes.
Okay. Yeah, and again, it goes back to, almost shifting our mindset that this isn't just an issue of numbers and columns of numbers, that, while it's an accounting issue, it really has a much more holistic opportunity to communicate what we're doing. And so where we have data and data points, filtering that in. So, I've tripped you up. I don't mean to trip you up, but I don't want to feel like I'm putting you back in the hot seat. But how do we know if we're being transparent? I mean, is this only like something that we learn if we're not being transparent? Or how do we as an organization really understand that we're doing it right?
Well, again, my simple answer would be sort of what I just mentioned a minute ago. If you're posting things, you're starting to become transparent. The level of transparency you want to be is an internal decision and a leadership decision. There are, again, if you go out on the web and you Google on this nonprofit transparency, there's different checklists out there. They're not long. It's not a very long list of things to do, but there's a few things that are considered norms in with transparency. And if you're doing those things, I think you're doing what you can and the basics. Again, I think the deeper discussion is what more should we be doing. But it's okay to say, we've got A, B, C, D, and E out there. We're going to post that regularly. We're going to keep that updated. We're doing our share. We're being transparent.
Okay. And maybe just adding that vocabulary to, um, again, I loved what you said, going back to having a commitment to managing and stewarding a culture of transparency. I got to believe that there are probably a lot of boards across this country where they haven't had that discussion, not for any malfeasance, it just hasn't been part of the conversation, I guess.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, there's many things for a board to be concerned about within an organization. There's programming, there's fundraising, there's the financials themselves, there's keeping the organization afloat or growing, whatever. So it just, it needs to be an intentional ad at the leadership level to just say, okay, this is something we need to address. And you know what, it might be a one and done thing. At one board meeting, you address it, you decide what you're going to do, and then you operationalize it, you move forward. So it's not something that necessarily needs to take up time for a year, every board meeting for a year or something like that.
Yeah. I think that it's an interesting approach, because when we first started our conversation, I was almost had a sense of like, oh man, this is going to be a heavy lift. This is going to be a real challenging thing to get folks to understand and buy into and support. But I just think that so much of what you've been saying with us today on counting on Chazin, it's it has a lot to do with common sense. It has a lot to do with communication,
Right.
and it has a lot to do with elevating our sector. And ultimately, I mean, we know when those stories come out about the bad apple in our sector, it just filters across to everyone, from dog shelters to, art museums. I mean, it does not help. And so if we kind of have this new mindset and strategy, it really pushes us forward. It's very smart.
Right.
Very, very smart.
It's a step sort of in the whole picture of building that credibility.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Chris Bavolack, I mean, I always learn so much from you. I always think that you are a calm, logical, intentional voice in our sector. And as a director of finance and operations, I am of Chazin Company. I bet you've seen a lot. And so it's been wonderful to have you with us on another episode of Counting on Chazin. I want to remind everyone that we have a lot of more information, blog posts. We have additional episodes on Counting on Chazin. And so these episodes really help to kind of maybe spark some new ideas, answer questions, help you to communicate with your board or your teams on how you can navigate so many of these pressing issues that us in the nonprofit sector have to deal with. So, Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
We'll see you again on Counting with Chazin. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Julia Patrick.